Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. Um, I don't know about you, but January felt deeply internal for me. I found myself experiencing so many breakthroughs in my own path, in my own mystic path, and it felt imperative to not open my mouth too soon and share from that raw, cracked open place and to really be with the medicine of my own path and my own life. And yeah, it makes me really curious to hear about your experiences. I wonder how January has felt like for you. I wonder if you were moving through a lot in this period. And yeah, in this episode, I'm going to share about February. And before I do so, I'm going to share a couple announcements with you. The first one is that my books are currently open for Year Ahead 2025 readings. These readings are very special. They're very near and dear to my heart. And the people who have been called to do this work have been just the most incredible humans who are really ready to meet themselves in that deeper layer of recognizing, embracing, and claiming their own truth. In these readings, what we'll do is we'll look at your birth chart and we'll create sacred space where the astrology transits of 2025 can talk to us, can inspire us, can guide us. These readings are highly relational. We're really in conversation with one another and with your birth chart. And in terms of the format, this year what I'm offering is a 2-session package, each about an hour in length, give or take. And in the first session, we'll start with checking in around any hopes, dreams, desires, struggles, anything you are shedding, anything that's really present and wants to be named in your experience with regards to considering the coming year as a whole. And then we'll spend some time looking at your chart together. And then we'll part ways. You'll have some time to really integrate what we discussed on a deeper level, see what's coming up in your day to day reality. And then in the second session, we'll dive deeper into aspects of our conversation that you'd like to further dig into, or maybe there are left turns that we want to take, and we can explore other avenues that we didn't really get to in the first session. Um, I also want to name that these sessions are deeply intuitive, alchemical containers. And so we will not limit ourselves to astrology. Sometimes I'm I'm hearing the call to pull some tarot cards or maybe do energy work with certain clients, whichever modality feels most helpful for where you are in your journey. We can really employ that in the space of these 2 sessions. My intention is to facilitate a space and to guide you into a process, right? For your body, for your being, for your spirit, whereby you come into a deeper understanding and a more intimate relationship with who you currently are and the state of being that you would like to step more deeply into, that you would like to cultivate for the coming year. I've done a few of these with returning clients over January, and it's been such a powerful process. So if you're called to this offering, the link will be in the show notes below. There are limited spots, so I encourage you to book it now if this sounds interesting and if it sounds like this is the right time for you to do this kind of work. The second announcement I want to share is about the podcast. And this is maybe less of an announcement and more of a behind the scenes into my process and my current relationship with this space and with this format, this medium. And some of you may enjoy this if you love hearing about the creative process. If you want to jump straight into hearing about February, I'll make sure to put the timestamp for that as well so you can do so. So if you've been following my podcast for a while, you know that I've been experimenting with different forms of sharing the guidance that I received every month with all of you listening in. Something that has been true for me is that I am a Virgo rising. I love, love planning. And also, something that's always been very tricky for me is I am not someone whose system loves to plan too far ahead. Like, often when I look at the coming year, it almost feels like I might as well not do that because, it can feel really overwhelming to look at this giant swath of time. Like, so much is always happening and always evolving at the same time. And this is kind of a funny thing, right? Because I'm also an astrologer. I'm someone who loves to see patterns, but I found that coming at it from more of an anticipatory place rather than a place of anchoring into the truth of what is alive and what is moving through me in the moment doesn't really work. That being said, I've always loved the process of looking at the month ahead because that feels very workable for me. That feels very practical. And in some ways, I've been grappling with that with the podcast because for those of you who have been following me since 2022-ish, I kind of got into a rhythm of sharing weekly contemplations on the astrology of the week. And for a while, that felt amazing. And then at some point, I checked in and that no longer felt correct. And since then, I've kind of been in that liminal limbo space of like, how do I want to share this? How do I want to be in process with myself, but also with all of you tuning in? And something that felt really exciting for me was as I was sitting with February, and this is maybe more internal and may not totally impact the podcast on an external level in a major way, but it does feel pretty significant to me because I realized what I really wanted to do is to kind of sit with the astrology of the coming month and then to share in a more regular way than a monthly contemplation. So the contemplation rather than monthly is kind of an ongoing thing that we're going to be doing on this podcast, but it's also going to happen in a much more curated way. So what that means is I'm essentially at the start of the month, I will be sharing the theme of what I'm picking up on for us to start with. It will be an intuitive, free flow contemplation based on the images that I always receive intuitively at the start of the month, or rather, more accurately, at the end of the previous month for the coming month, right? And in that first episode of the month, I will be largely staying clear off of any sort of astrological delineation. or any tarot spreads or anything like that. Instead, we'll really just focus on the image, and we'll create more space that way. We'll create more spaciousness for us to begin feeling into the process that that image may bring us into. And when I'm talking about the process, I'm really talking about kind of a larger energetic flow, right? That brings that image forth for me to share with you. And then, and that process, exists before I started recording this episode, right? And it then gets alchemized as I'm sitting with it, as I'm expanding it, and as you are feeling into it. And then you'll be taking that into the span of your month. And throughout the month, I'll be sharing kind of more detailed delineations that are more perhaps grounded in me kind of speaking from my astrologer seat, right? Or from my tarot reader seat, or just kind of talking more deeply and maybe more from a mental place of expanding into the archetype that wants to kind of assist us in that process, right? I may also bring in the gene keys. I may bring in human design, whatever feels most exciting in terms of grounding into kind of specific transits, right? That provide accent or flavor throughout the month, but isn't kind of the big picture of what the month is bringing up for us in general. Those of you who have been with me for a while know that I love swimming in that multidimensional, multimodality soup, because to me it brings forth some of the most interesting contemplations. And so the episodes interspersed throughout the month will likely be completely spontaneous, meaning I will pick transits that that feel like they want to be spoken to, that feel like they want to be shared within the container of this podcast, within the larger exploration of this flow that we're playing with. And I'll also likely share them at the time when the transit is happening, so you can contemplate alongside the transit itself. So you'll probably start seeing notifications popping up of me sharing an episode at like 12 a.m. So that might be kind of the vibe that we're going with moving forward. Some of the episodes will be, pretty meaty and pretty substantial, like the transmissions that you're used to receiving from me. But some may also be totally creative. Maybe I'll share a poem, or maybe I'll share a song that came through me. Maybe I'll share thoughts about specific works of art or a book, or maybe even contemplations on sharing our creative work. It will the format will be emergent, spontaneous, and it will be maybe straying from what we're usually expecting from a podcast format. I'm so excited to explore this with all of you for a couple reasons. One is it will hopefully keep the contemplations pretty short and digestible. I know for many of us these days, there's a lot of podcasts, a lot of books, a lot of courses and resources at our disposal, and it can be pretty hard to keep up with everything. So I want to ensure that I'm not jamming you with too much information. And also, I'm excited about this format because hopefully I think the meta theme that I'm personally exploring here is our sense of how the larger currents of energy speak to us. I often find myself feeling restricted by the kind of typical, psychic or channel format of receiving information. And I imagine that those of you listening to this podcast sometimes runs into that too, right? We get tired of hearing, every podcast, every YouTube channel sharing the same thing, over and over again, right? And I want to more deeply honor how the planets, the energies speak to me individually rather than feeling like I'm trying to get to the top of the top hits chart, right? of this genre of like forecasts, and also to be completely clear, I never really see these episodes as forecasts anyway. Like I really see them more as kind of energetic attunement, right? For all of us to anchor into as we move through the month. And this also feels so much more aligned with my own process, preparing these episodes, practicing the art of contemplating alongside these larger beings, the planets, the archetypes of the tarot, right? I usually allow myself to receive intuitive information and guidance first through connecting with the spirits and the consciousness of the planets of these greater forces, even the spirit of the month itself, right? This isn't something that we've talked a lot about, but each of the Gregorian calendar month carries its own energetics with it. So that's a big one, to really feel into, right? And often I do that work of tuning in before studying the planetary patterns, right? Before studying things more from this technical perspective. And so this way, hopefully those of you listening will get a better sense of what the process actually looks like for someone who is actively practicing, right, these crafts. I do think there's something here that's really informative and illuminating that hopefully, especially for those of you who are practitioners yourself or who are interested in practicing, you can get a better sense of what the practice looks like rather than just, receiving the brownie, so to speak, right? I'd love to take you to the kitchen and kind of show you how the cake gets made rather than just feeding you. I think it's more fun for all of us involved. So that's a lot of words, but in short, we're going to start the month with a clairvoyant, mostly, or clairsentient or clairaudient intuitive read on the month, and then I'll be sharing episodes throughout the month talking about various transits as they call to me. Yeah, we're going to try out this new format until I receive further directives from my guides, from the guides of the podcast, to evolve the format and to evolve how this space wants to be stewarded. All right, so let's get into it. The theme for February is answering the call of the cave. I'll let you sit with this phrase for a second. What does it feel for you when I bring in the idea of answering the call of the cave? And after I received that phrase, I also received kind of a sub theme or a subtitle, if you will, for the coming month, which is the pulse of faith. So, together, maybe these two phrases, answering the call of the cave and the pulse of faith, is beginning to bring up some images for you. Perhaps here you want to pause this episode and maybe write down the image that you perceive. For me, what I saw was a dark cave by the sea, and I also saw an image of all of us tuning in to this episode, entering the cave with a lantern and with curiosity. There's something calling us from deep inside the cave. There's an almost imperceptible emanation of a frequency. Perhaps it's not sonic for you. Perhaps you see it in your mind's eye. Perhaps you you are drawn to its frequency, and its frequency is resonating with a part of your body. Some of you may hear it as a melody. Some of you may feel it only as a knowing. It feels to me like those of us tuning into this transmission, we're being called to go deeper. We're being asked to go deeper. Deeper into what's always been true for us, deeper into what's always called us to come closer, but perhaps in the past we haven't been fully ready. Perhaps we've been too scared. Perhaps our minds, our egos have not relaxed enough to actually heed that call, to actually follow the resonance. That call is often the call of the soul, of our spirit, of the self with capital S, the part of us that have been here since the beginning of time and will continue to be here long after our physical forms are gone. That part of us is deeply connected to the cosmic song, to the oceanic current, to the vital life force of existence itself. And February brings to us a massive opportunity to really check in with that part of us that hears the call. And along with it, it brings an opportunity to heal, to reclaim, to nurture our relationship with that call, because that relationship is often as important as the call itself. There's always a million different reasons to run away from the call of the soul. In our mundane existence, in the dimension of reality, where we have to pay our bills, where we have to feed ourselves, we have to tend to the people who depend on us, where we have obligations to fulfill to our communities, our attention is always being stretched thin. It's easy as humans living in the modern world to believe that this is a new phenomenon. Because of our current technologies and the way that everything is at our fingertips, there's certainly more opportunities for distractions. But at the same time, it's important to recognize that this experience of being pulled away, this experience of the constant distraction away from that which truly, truly matters, is really nothing new at all. Our blood lineage ancestors, our spiritual teachers, the mystics, the saints, the alchemists, the witches, the prophets, are creative luminaries, people who have deeply inspired us from the past and who have paved the way forward for what is becoming available to us now. Everybody who has walked the path of their soul, of their spirit, has also experienced being pulled away from the true call of their soul. This is important to highlight because part of the illusion is that we're alone and that what we're facing is new. And that's not to take away from the uniqueness of our circumstances and the gifts that tapping into that uniqueness can help us bring forward. But that is to say, do not give in to the idea that you're doing this alone and that the struggle itself is unique to you, because it's really not. So, on a practical level, February calls us to make space so that we can practice reclaiming our relationship, rethinking, reimagining what kind of relationship we want to have with this part of us that hears the call. It's, again, so easy to get pulled into all these different directions, into the parts that don't believe we can hear that pulse, right, of truth, of what is truly for us. The parts that are stuck in old beliefs and outdated conceptions about the limits of who we can become and what we can bring forth into the world. The service, the gifts, the unique contribution that we can pour forth, especially in times that feel difficult, in times that feel dark. And February is a reminder that while the work of recognizing that hurt, blocked part of us is important and necessary, the ego can work in sneaky ways, right? The ego very often keeps us from being able to access our own inherent power. It keeps us from remembering our spiritual birthright to listen to the call of the soul. This is an experience that goes beyond the imposter syndrome. This is spiritual amnesia. It's that feeling of knowing that there's music within you and yet not letting yourself sing and use that voice, even if it's only for yourself in the bathroom. It's that feeling of knowing that you have the capacity to hold space for others in processing grief, in processing anxiety, processing confusion, and yet not letting yourself share or signal to others that you are available. This spiritual amnesia leads us to all kinds of distortions. It makes us sick. It makes us tired. It leads to a feeling of not enoughness, a sense of destitute, that our gifts are not enough, that somehow we need to chase after some external measure or standard that has never really been part of our soul calling. And when that energy, that emanation of your own true frequency is not allowed to pour forth, to overflow into your environment as part of not just service to others, but service to yourself, that energy turns back into itself, right? It becomes a form of blockage. It becomes poison. So this month, I invite us to sit with the question of, where have I abandoned or ignored my ability to track the pulse of my own soul level information? Can I pinpoint the exact belief, the exact memory, the exact interaction that made me lose faith, that made me lose confidence in my own knowing? Are there practices that I can recommit myself to in order to be able to come back to a confident, reverent relationship with this part of me? It's interesting because as I'm saying this, the word that kept coming into my mind is the word sin. And the word sin is one that has often been misused in our overculture, as well as in a lot of religious institutions um, that hold power. And yet, something I'm remembering from my days going to Sunday school when I was a child was this idea of the sin being about missing the mark. I'm getting this image of an archer with their arrows and bows, right? And missing their target. And in a sense, losing our connection, losing our relationship with our own vital life force, with our own soul calling and soul desire is part of that forgetting, right? Part of that missing the mark that we can get stuck in. And often the antidote to this is really not as complex as our brains would like to make it to be, right? Our brains like to think, okay, now I have to go out and do all these things. I have to prove to myself that I'm able to be XYZ. But that's almost never the truth. The truth is actually quite simple. The truth is that you get out of it by recognizing the illusion, by recognizing that the voice that you've been hearing, the critical, it's funny, I'm actually losing my words. Right? The critical itself is part of the forgetting, is part of the amnesia. The critical turns the questions that are meant for the collective, that are meant, as Rilke said, for us to live into, right? Some of these questions don't have exact answers. Some of these questions are guideposts, they are lanterns for deeper explorations. Part of that critical voice, that critical opinion, that critical fear is the question turned inwards. And rather than allowing that question to allow a process, right, to unfold on the external world, that question turned inwards now becomes self-doubt. That question becomes worrying about not being worthy enough, not having what it takes. My sense is that many of us will need to be patient with ourselves as we reclaim our access to this part of us. The sub-theme of the pulse of faith is important here to remember, right? When we think about even the phrasing of that sentiment, it chose to come to me in the form of a pulse, right? A pulse is something that is felt, that requires us to go deeper into our felt sense, into our body, for us to be able to access. The subtitle was not the bright illumination of faith, right? This isn't that blinding light that we often confuse profound realizations to be. Sometimes profound realizations don't happen in us being able to see clearly and have this eureka moment, right? That certainly can be part of that experience, but that's not the totality of the expression of that experience. Many times, the experience of discovering our truth, discovering the truth of reality, is subtle. It's something that requires us to turn off that part of us that wants to understand and wants to latch on to a specific answer, and to go a little deeper, to allow our deeper felt sense, our body's intelligence to take over. It speaks to us in subtle ways. And therefore, it often gets drowned out, right? And even our attempts to address the blocks can really distract us from actually developing the ability to listen to this quiet voice. So, this imagery of us going into this cave, feeling the pull, deeply trusting that pull, even if we don't have all the evidence, that serves as a reminder to keep it low stakes. Can we listen to the soft, quiet voice that is nudging us to move in the direction of what we've been desiring to do, even if taking those steps will be invisible, will not come with this grand fanfare of, wow, look at what you've done, you're so amazing, right? This February to me really feels like it's not yet the time to be going out and celebrating and putting on that final project, right? We're not quite there yet. There's still something to explore here. And perhaps that call for exploration is a little bit inconvenient, right? Sometimes we want to rush to the ending. Sometimes we want to rush to displaying to others what we've been working on, because that gives us that dopamine hit, right? It helps us feel that immediate sense of validation and satisfaction. And this month feels to me like it's calling for us to work with that quiet voice to reorganize our realities just a little bit. So the other day, I was walking around Chelsea, a neighborhood in New York City where I'm currently living, and I passed by a gallery that immediately caught my attention. The gallery was currently closed, but to the left of the entrance, the gallery had the exhibition notes, and I paused to read the notes, and I was really struck by what I was reading. So the exhibition is called Chasma, and the artist, the sculptor, is Peter Speliopoulos. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is what the exhibition note said. I wanted to read it to you because it feels so synchronistic that as I was contemplating on February, this was what caught my attention. So the note said, this exhibition draws its name from the Greek word for chasm, a term often associated with mythological caves, particularly those linked to the underworld. This body of work bears a personal significance for the artist, as it references his surname Spelio, which translates directly to cave in modern Greek. Inspired by caves as portals between realms, connecting the underworld to heaven, serving as sanctuaries for gods and embodying sacred spaces, these works symbolize creation, the cyclical nature of life and rebirth. Speleopoulos, influenced by Jung's portrayal of caves as alchemical vessels, symbols of the unconscious, crafted the series in black stoneware ceramic. He initiates each piece on the wheel and then meticulously hand builds and sculpts the intricate adornments. Each chasma sculptural vessel rests atop a handcrafted base, designed to allow the flow of air beneath. This elevation of the vessels echoes ancient Greek cultural practices, where legged objects often held religious and mythological significance. It was believed that the space underneath these forms facilitated the passage of chthonic spirits or divine inspiration, acting as a conduit between the physical and spiritual realms. The concept of creating space for spiritual passage marks a continuation in the evolution of Speleopoulos' ceramic practice. It follows his previous solo exhibitions, Archaeos, Chthonic, and Myteria, all of which draw inspiration from Greek beliefs about the interplay between tangible and metaphysical worlds. In Chasma, Speleopoulos further explores this intersection, crafting pieces that serve not just as objects, but as bridges between the seen and unseen, the earthly and the divine. What struck me about this note is this exploration of caves as portals between realms, connecting the underworld to heaven, serving as sanctuaries for gods and embodying sacred spaces. It's just so fascinating to consider for the coming month. When I feel into this idea of going into the cave, there's a quality of surrendering to the yin, to the goddess within, to the darkness, not necessarily darkness as evil, but darkness as the unknown, right? That which is hidden. It's reminding me of the archetype of the snake in Chinese astrology, right? That part of us that is connected to the mystery. And the mystery, the divine, takes on a specific form when we go down into that chthonic place, right? When we go down into the underworld, the unconscious, the depth of our psyche, the divine looks quite different than what we're used to. Especially when we think of spirituality, which for those of us who have been influenced by Western ideas of spirituality, and let's be real, are there any of us who have not been subjected to that? I think not. And for those of us who are not used to considering this idea of the divine that lies underneath, right? That lies in the belly, in the depths. Going down there can feel really scary. And also there's such deep intelligence there, right? So I'm going to close out with a passage from this deck that I really love. It's called the Wild Unknown Archetypes deck. And the writer, Kim Krans, the author, described the archetype of the cave as such. In esoteric teachings, the cave is known to reside in the center of the heart. Within its walls, the whispers of compassion and self-understanding can be heard. Yet, because of its mystery and power, many of us fear the cave and never try to find it. We busy ourselves in the bright lights of the city, while the cavernous and dimly lit chamber calls to us in the night. Where is your cave? You already know. Return to it and tend the fire. All right, that feels very complete to me. I encourage you to return to this imagery and to this episode whenever you feel like it. And I hope that it continues to support you and nourish you throughout the months. I wish you a delicious, potent journey into your personal cave, whatever that looks like. I hope you find a deeper relationship with your true voice, and I hope that you don't forget that you're not doing this alone. I hope that you remember to reach out for support and for nourishment anytime that feels needed. I'm sending you so much love. Thank you for listening in. Thank you for contemplating with me. And I'll see you back here whenever you tune in.